Сайн мэцхан үзэгчтэй гэрэл нэвтрүүлгийн удаагийнхаа дугаараар та бүхэнд хүрэхэд бэлэн болоод байна. Тэгээ өнөөдөр бид нар их сонирхолтой зочныг урьсан байгаа. Тэгээд энэ зочин маань бол Монголын түүхийн тухай, ялангуяа Христ итгэдэг хүмүүсийн түүхийн тухай сонирхолтой ном бичсэн талаар их судалгаа хийсэн юм эрдэмтэн хүн байгаамаа. Тэгээд бүгдээрээ ярилцлага эхэлцгээе. So thank you for coming and
thank you for having me.
Yeah, having this time together with us, and I hope you will have a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Together. So we would like to start with your background, a little bit background information. And the most interesting thing is that when have you lived in Mongolia?
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me to your show. It's great to be back in Mongolia.
Of course.
And I've come at a very nice season where the air is fresh and clean.
Yeah, this is a wonderful time.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time.
Another exciting thing about you just mentioned was that you wrote this book called Step by Step, right? And the book actually covers the topics that Mongolian people don't really know much. It's about Christians and Mongolian history. What actually made you interested in Mongolian history? I mean, of course, we have a big, great history, and for you personally, what part is so intriguing for you?
Okay. I enjoy studying, and I enjoy studying history and sociology and these things. When I came to Mongolia, it became obvious, I think, quite early that the Mongolian people were very proud of their history. There was permission again to get excited about Genghis Khan and the history. And I could see that with the changes from socialism to a new way, there are issues of identity. Who are we? Can we be great again as a nation?
Exactly.
And I sort of heard these conversations, and I could feel it in the spirit of the people, that there was a deep, deep love for their own history, but a great curiosity as well. And I went out with a Christian church. We had a winter camp, and we were doing some Bible teaching and these things. And I asked if I could give a short lecture on something of Christian history in Central Asia. I had found a book which gave a very elementary history. And so I made a little lecture, and I spoke with a translator. And at the end of my lecture, the people were weeping, they were crying.
Okay.
And I was thinking, what's going on?
These are Mongolian people
Yeah,
you're
Mongolian
speaking to, right?
There's young people, maybe teenagers, maybe 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. I have somewhere I've touched something in their heart, and they're weeping. And I'm thinking, I was very curious. And so I said, are there any questions? And one young man stood up, and he said, Baksha, he said, why has nobody ever told us this history before? And I heard that question, why has no one told us this history? I heard that question, and I felt like an arrow go into me. I thought, I can tell the story.
Right.
Maybe this can be a contribution that I can make. I can go and find the resources and libraries and universities around the world, and I can bring together the research. So, in a sense, Mongolians' love of history, I saw that. And then this young man's question, why has nobody told us about the Christian history? It was like an arrow into my heart. I thought, maybe that can be my contribution.
That's great. It's actually the fact that, Mongolians, as being the nomadic culture, we don't really carry too much story, evidence written or, any other forms. But we actually had so much interaction with other cultures that actually keeps the records. So we have more records on our history in outside Mongolia than actually in Mongolia. So I guess it was a great resource and a great help for you to really start searching for the resources that they have available in English and other languages.
I think you're right to recognize that the resources are in many different languages around the world, and the resources are also in different countries and university libraries and museums around the world. So to be a really, really good historian for Mongolian history, you have to know 5, 6 languages. You have to be
and
able
in
to read
the
old
ancient
script,
forms,
the ancient scripts, the old scripts,
right.
to be a really good historian. So, but I've tried to find resources that have been translated. I've been talking with some of the scholars who work on these things, and so hopefully I've pulled together a true record. But in all research and writing, there is some interpretation,
right.
but that's normal. And it's now that this writing is in the public sphere, people can critique it, and they can check and balance. And
yeah, speaking of critics, actually your book's been critiqued very positively amongst Mongolian historians and also general audience too.
Thank you.
So I would like to talk about more the history part right now.
Sure.
You know, as I grew up in Mongolia, knowing less history or very socialistic way of the history, we really didn't know much about the Genghis Khan and everything. But when the democracy won, you know, we switched to democracy, we started studying it. Still, we have a lot to study from our history because we've been a huge country, big empire, but never actually heard about the Christianity amongst them. So what is the earliest known history of Christians in Mongolian land?
Okay.
I bet there were so many different tribes, you know. So on this land, this area,
well, coming back to the first part of your observation is, and also the young man who asked me that question, I think during the socialist years, the socialist ideology had covered over some aspects of history that were there, but for ideological reasons were not promoted and were not in your textbooks.
Right.
So, and then in 1991, 92, when the country opens up to new changes, people say, well, what's all this new things? Oh, Christianity, that looks new. Some people said it's even an American religion. And I'm going, no, it's not new. It's not a new American religion.
It actually was here.
It was actually here.
Before actually the American exists, right?
Yes, before even America.
The country of America exists.
That's a good observation. So, and so I think it's important to go back and be honest with the history. So, even during the Republic from 1911 to 1924, or even before that, 1893 to 1924, there were Christians here in Urga.
Yeah,
right. There was
that's the fact.
Yeah, that's a fact. There was a Swedish missionary clinic, a medical clinic here. There was somebody whose job it was to make available Bibles and New Testaments to the Mongolia. They lived here in Urga. So there were Christians here, and there were some Mongolian people who were interested in Christianity then, and some Mongolians from Inner Mongolia came up and helped with the ministry of those people. From Inner Mongolia. So there were Christians here in Urga, 1893 to 1924. We have the Russians with their Orthodox Christianity as well. That's another stream. They were here also, and we can see their church over the eastern side of the city.
Yes.
So there were Christians here before the socialists came. But back, way back in our history, we can look again and we can see Christianity way back before the days of Genghis Khan.
Even before the Genghis Khan's then.
Even before
that means
Genghis
actually even before the empire.
Even before the
imperial
empire.
time, right? So you actually mentioned that we had Christian belief on this land even before the Genghis Khan's time. Who were they?
Well, in 2009, maybe 2006, a Japanese published a paper of examining an historical site 36 kilometers west of Ulaanbaatar.
So 36 kilometers from here.
Yeah, just west of here.
So,
and they think that this site was possibly the castle or the palace of Tuuh Khan, Wang Khan. Right? And what's interesting about that is he was the Khan of the Gereld.
Yeah.
And we know from historical evidence that the Gereld tribe was probably Christian. Well, most scholars, all scholars I think, agree that the Gereld tribe was a Christian tribe. So in this valley, across these grasslands here, when Genghis Khan came to power, there were Christians here. Now, Genghis Khan conquered the Kharat.
Yeah.
Right, and
well,
absorbed,
before that conflict
yeah.
starts, actually, Herod Wang Han was actually a big aid for Genghis Khan to get in power.
He was
He was the first ally almost.
He
right?
was indeed, yes. And the Kharat, Genghis Khan married his sons and his grandsons he took princesses and he married them. Now those princesses were Christian princesses. And he got administrators and financial managers to run the empire, mainly from the Kharat tribe. Now that Kharat tribe were Christians. So I think it's very, very interesting that as the Mongol nation took form with Genghis Khan, his administrators, the wives, many of them were Christians. Shall we try and name some? It's very exciting when we try and name them.
That's interesting.
So,
who is the those historical figure that's probably be Christians?
Yeah, well, itgegchdiin. Now, I hope you get that in the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
Okay. It's widely accepted that she was a Christian. Dorguschaten is widely accepted that she was a Christian, and some of the other queens were Christians, and I'd have to look at my book to get the names. Some of the key administrators were Christians.
Like such as?
Let's remind myself here of the names of those people. We have Dorguschaten, I said. Khatak, Chingay,
Soybek,
and Dorguschaten with Hulagu Khan. The administrators, there's some scholars even think that the writer of the secret history was a Christian. Now we need to think very carefully about that.
Yeah.
But in terms of how he wrote that history, he may have had sympathies with Christians. Now, some scholars have posed that. It might be so. But so I think it's very interesting then to see...
There's a possibility.
It's a possibility. Right? Now, we need to be honest with the history.
Right.
And we need to discuss the evidence very, very carefully. But there are the queens particularly, and of course, they were then able to influence their sons. And I think if you look at the sons, like the political policies the religious policies of Kublai Khan, Uygde Khan, Mu Khan, and Hulagu Khan, if we look at their religious policies, all of them showed some sympathy to all religions, but particularly to Christians.
I see.
And I think that is evidence that they were influenced perhaps by
Christians.
So I think we can look at the evidence of the religion of an individual, but then also the influence they had on the generations that followed. So amongst the empire as it took form, there are some Christians. But we can even go further back than that.
Okay.
Okay, so if we look at the Central Asian steppe, or the grassland steppes, and the kingdoms that rose and fell, there is good evidence that Christianity came across the Silk Road as early as the 7th century and found a reception in Xi'an with the Tang dynasty.
Okay.
And there's some solid archaeological evidence for that. There are gravestones with crosses on them. There is literature in in the desert in Western, excuse me, in Western China, where the air is dry. The scrolls have been preserved, and scholars have found these scrolls, and they open the scrolls very carefully, and then try and read the Sogdian language, the Syriac language, and as they've been reading these, they're going, now, this is a religion of light that has come. Where has it come from? It's come from Syria. It's come across the Silk Road.
So that was a Christian.
They were Christians coming across, and these Christians along the Silk Road were traders, right? And in their satchels, as they rode their donkeys and walked, they brought the Bible with them. the Syriac Bible.
Syriac Bible.
Yeah, and so all across these centers along the Silk Road, they started little schools, and they used the Syriac Bible to instruct their own people, but also the local people. Now that story goes right across to Xi'an in the Tang dynasty, and there is a really, really big 3-meter high stele. You know, stele are like a memorial stone.
Yes.
And that was dug up in the 18th century and translated, and it tells the history of these Christians who came across from Syriac. So they arrived here in the middle of the 7th century. And so right across the Central Asian steppe, these Christians were scattered along the Silk Road, and then there were enough of them to actually have a memorial stone carved during the Tang dynasty. Now,
so that's you're talking about like 6th, 7th century?
yes, yes.
Wow, that's only, you know, a few hundred years since the Christianity became legal,
Yes.
you know, religion for Rome, right? Wow.
Well, I think the interesting thing is to ask the question, are these similar or the same Christians as we find today in Mongolia? Okay, that's quite an interesting question, because when we look at any religion, there are different types of expression, right? So within Christianity, there are different types of expression as well.
Yeah.
So we have the Roman Catholic, we have the Russian Orthodox, we have many of the Christians here are Protestant Christians. And we also have another type of Christianity we'll call them the Syriac, Eastern Syrian Christians.
Okay.
Now, we often use the name Nestorian.
Historians.
Yeah. So
Basically, fundamental understanding for those beliefs are the same, right?
they are the same. I think there's always a challenge in translation. How do you take Christian ideas, which may seem very new and foreign,
Yeah.
how do you translate that into a new culture and a new language? That happens all around the world. We think also maybe some of the other religions, like in Buddhism, how do you translate the ideas expressed in Sanskrit in India and translate that into Chinese?
Yeah.
So this translation process is always a challenge. So back then, these Eastern Syrian Christians came, and then how do you take their ideas and the Bible teaching, and how do you translate that into Chinese ideas then?
And then back to nomadic lifestyle culture, right?
And then maybe for the Gereld or the Uyghur, or these other tribes, Naiman, Ungut, how do you translate those ideas? So if we read the Nestorian stele, the really, really big memorial stone.
So it's like 3 meters tall?
It's 3 meters tall.
Wow.
And it stands in a museum in Xi'an today. And of course, it's very good archaeological evidence because it does not decay like
Right.
paper. It's
Exactly.
there, it's there forever. But if you read that and translate it, it tells of God as creator. It tells about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, just a little bit, not a lot, but it is there. It tells about the coming of the religion of light, so they use the image of light very strongly. It tells of how the Christians organized themselves. It gives some teaching, which is plainly from the New Testament, from the Gospels particularly. There's some teaching which is plainly from there. Now, if we read it today, we go, is this Christian? And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, yes, it is. It is. Now, they don't use the same words as us.
Yeah, of course.
They don't maybe have the same emphasis as us. But I think we can say safely that they were Christians. A little bit different from us today, but with the translation challenge, that's understandable.
You know, today we understand that Christianity, the Christian belief, is main impact to form the Western culture, right? So we think that Christianity is a Western thing, but as you speak, it seems like Christianity actually flourished in a different culture at the same time, you know, without depending on each other. You know, today we have Christian, you know, missionaries came to Mongolia from Western countries and Westernized countries and teaching all the Christianity things, giving us the idea of this is foreign religion. But actually, Christianity was so broad that it could actually survive and flourish in different settings of the culture, like nomadic culture and Western culture and stuff.
Yes, I think it's very, very important to understand right back in the early days when Jesus Christ was amongst us. Soon after he died and rose again and the church began, much of our Western history takes the story into Europe.
Yeah.
But there are many, many Christians who went and lived in Baghdad, today modern Baghdad, in that part of the world. Okay, now because our Western culture comes from Greek and Roman roots, we kind of like forget that over in Baghdad in the east, there are a whole lot of Christians as well. Now, it's also very important to remember that Jesus was born, grew up, and taught and had his whole ministry in an Asian country, in Israel.
In Israel.
And the first church were Asian Christians. And the first churches were in modern-day Turkey.
Yeah.
Right? And also there are many Christians, of course, over in modern-day Iraq and Iran. It's very important to remember that. So it's not a Western religion at all, although our Western history of our Western cultures emphasize that because that's where our own cultural roots were. So, so these ones in the East, they were politically separate from Rome in a different empire. Theologically and their understanding as well, they did not give authority to the Roman Pope. Right? They had their own structure based in a Christian center near today's Baghdad. So these were Asian Christians thinking in Asian categories, separated from Rome very, very early. And they were started translating the Gospels and Paul's writings into local Asian language, Syrian particularly, Syriac, and also the Sogdian. So they were using those languages to understand the teaching of Jesus. Now, I think another very interesting thing is, if you look at the Syriac writing, the Syrian writing, right, in the way that they wrote, it looks like today's Mongol-Bichik. And because the Syriac Bible was written in the Syriac script, they bring this across to Central Asia on the Silk Road. So when Genghis Khan forms his empire, he needs to have some sort of script. He needs to, what can I use for the records, for the taxes? And because he is bringing in Kharat administrators, he says, we'll use your script. Excuse me. So scholars generally agreed that the Mongol-Bichik comes originally from the Syriac script, and if the Syriac is this way, but Mongol-Bichik is vertical, and you look at it, it looks very similar.
Yeah, I heard there's so much similarity between Cyrillic, ancient, especially Cyrillic script and Mongolian traditional script.
So what I think is really interesting is we can say that the Mongol-Bichik has come to us from Syriac, right? Why? Because the Syriac Bible was here already before the Mongols took possession.
That could, possible.
Yeah, it's a strong possibility.
We should study those things.
Yeah.
As we study the, religious histories, it seems like every religions has some bad era, bad times, bad days in the histories.
Gereld, амьд яриа.
Genghis Khan and his descendants were very tolerant to many religions. I think it was the first time in the human history that happened. Because back then, religions were fighting for politics and fighting for land, But back then, they were just all living in one square, living in peace.
If you look at Harhuram, right? There are many Christians, many different Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, all living together. In fact, I think it was Mongoliin Khan. He called a religious debate. And so, these Christians might argue
let's
with
find
each
out
other.
what's behind you guys.
Let's have this debate. They're very, very curious to see how that worked out. So I think the religious policy of the Khans was very, very generous, allowing all the religions to be there, as long as they obeyed the Khan. That was very, very important. And I think if you look at our own history books that we use in our classes here in Mongolia, and I think of class 4 particularly, there's maps of the ancient Kharkhuram, and you can see on it there's a Christian church marked on the map. It says Christos Shashni Sum. There. And I'm thinking, see, even then, there's a recognition that the Christians were there amongst, in Kharkhuram, even from Ugde Khan's time, Ugde Khan's time.
One important historical figure in Mongolian imperial time is Shehi Hotak. Some scholars, as well as you, think probably that since he's from Hirede Amak, he will be a Christian, or at least influenced by Christians. Do you have any comment?
I think there's some substance in that.
He's the one we believe that who wrote the itgegchdiin, right?
Right. I think there's some evidence for that. There's a very fine line. If you don't have the concrete evidence, I wrote or signed, right? We have to always leave some room for speculation.
Yes.
There's some feasible, reasonable evidence to suggest influence in some of those key documents that we have of the Mongol Empire. We can't say that Christians wrote them. There's some debate around the dating of these documents.
Right.
But I think we can say that they were probably influenced to some degree by the Christians that were there amongst the Mongolians.
So our time is actually running out, but one important question is left. Why is it so important to study or reveal the Christian side of the Mongolian history? Why we have to dig that way? The Mongolian history is big and broad. What's the particular benefit of learning Christians amongst the histories?
Well, I think the Mongolian people, can answer that question as they learn the history. But I think all nations need to understand their own history. Who we are today is a result of our history. I've been thinking about the Mongolian saddle, on the horse. It has 2 stirrups. So I think of one stirrup is today and one stirrup is yesterday. And if we can get those in the balance, not one shorter or this one higher, if we can keep them in balance, then we can go and move forward into the future well. And I think that's quite a nice picture. We need to understand who we are today because of things of the past. And if we understand the past, that gives us identity today as to who we are. And I think, remember we started by reflecting on 1991, 92. Who are
when
we as
had
Mongolians?
Finally freedom to identify ourselves with our own, ideas.
So we can think, and rightly so, that the empire dominates the history. That's absolutely true. That was a great grand time when the Mongols had power and influence across the world. But I think it's also true, an imperative that we must be honest with our history. The history is there. And so today, when we think about how we continue to form ourselves as a nation, can you be Mongolian and not Buddhist? Can you be Mongolian and not shamanist? Is shamanism and Buddhism the only, do you have to have those to be
identified as a
Mongol? No, I don't think so at all, because there was Christianity amongst the Mongolian people a long time ago. There were Christians right through to 1950 in Inner Mongolia, right? And in Buryatia and amongst the Khalmyk as well. So if you think of the bigger grouping of the Mongols today, there have been Christians amongst them for so long. And those Mongolian Christians, the Inner Mongolia and Burya, Khalmyk, and now in the Khalkh here, there are Christians and there have been Christians. And so you can be Mongolian and Christian and still be part of today's nation and still be part of the conversations and the shaping and forming. And I think that's so important as we seek to move into the future together.
Thank you very much for sitting down and talking with me this very interesting subject. I mean, if we keep talking about, we could talk about this book and, you know, how thick this book is. So big will our conversation will last.
Well, people can buy that in the shops here in Ulaanbaatar. You could show it to the camera maybe. Here's the English edition.
Yes.
And there's the Mongolian edition.
This is the Mongolian edition, right?
So I'm actually working on another project right now. I'm nearly finished the history of the Bible amongst the Mongolian people. So hopefully that will be coming out soon.
That will be great aid to this history too.
Yes.
So thank you for having time with us, and it was wonderful to talking to you.
Thanks very much.
Гэрэл нэвтрүүлэг ингээд төгсж байна. Хэрвээ түүхээ мэдгүй бол ойд төрсөн сармагчин мэд болдгоо гэж ухаанд мэрэгд маань хэлсэн байдаг. Бид нараа түүхээ зөвхөн нэг талаас нь хараад ямар том алдаанд хүрж болдгийг ерөнхийдөө олон жилийн турш харсан шүү дээ. Харин өнөөдөр бид нар Монголын энэ агуу баялаг түүхийн нэгэн жижигэн шигтгэе болсон хэсгийг ярьлаа. Магадгүй жижигэн шигтгэе юм шиг сонсогдсон боловч энэ шигтгэе маань Монголын түүхэнд асар их хувь нэмэр оруулсан байх боломжтой. Хэлхийн мишээс бид нар түүхээ улам бүлэг судлах хэрэгтэй байгаа билээ. Ингээд анхаарал тавьж үзсэн үзэгч танд маш их баярлалаа. Хэдүүлээ дараагийн дугаараар эргээд уулзцгаая. Баяртай үзэгчтэй.